Dan Seifert is here. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
Welcome back to the show. You had a big package this week. Our friend Jason Snell contributed. A staffer from around the Verge contributed. This week was the 25th anniversary of the iMac.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to unpack. Like, that means a lot of things.
Yeah, it means we're old.
It means we're old. It is incredible to think that the Mac was a younger platform when the iMac came out than the iPhone is now. John Gerber pointed that when he linked to Umar's visual history of the Mac. Crazy. The Mac was 14 when the iMac came out. The iPhone is 16.
I hate correct?
Let me just get those numbers exactly right.
The iPhone
that is correct.
Yeah.
Those are terrible. That's terrible.
So the Mac was 14 when the iMac came out. The iPhone today is 16, which is just bonkers to think about where these respective products are and their impact on the world. But the iMac really changed a lot of things. Tell us about this package, Dan.
Yeah. So, 25 years since the first iMac went on sale. It was like August 15th, 1998. And the iMac, as Jason really pointed out really well in his piece, it was the product that saved. Product is the one that really turned around the company's fortunes. It allowed them. It was successful and popular enough to basically develop the iPod, which then became successful and popular enough to develop the iPhone. And then, Apple becomes $3 trillion company. So without the iMac, like, you don't have any of that. And Apple at the time was like very on the brink of not existing anymore. and all of the products that had been developed in the 90s were like these kind of beige boxes, very typical looking, not a whole lot of creativity or design were put into them. But then when Jobs came back and teamed up with Ive and they brought out the iMac and just kind of like changed everything in terms of like the perspective of what a home or a consumer electronic in your home could look like. It had this like radical design. It was a thing that was like people looked at it and they wanted it. Whereas if you looked at a PC at the time, you looked at it to maybe want to use it and like do things on it, but you didn't want the object itself. It was just a box, whereas the iMac was an object. And then that design was so influential. It not only permeated throughout Apple's lineup, influencing the design of what the software looked like on Macs and then further on down the line, but it also made translucent plastic products really popular at the turn of the century, all the way down to the infamous George Foreman grill that looks like an iMac. So,
I had never seen that before until this package became a thing, and I'm now obsessed with this translucent George Foreman.
It's fantastic.
It is the thing I want most in the world. If anyone listening wants to buy me one,
do not buy a used George Foreman grill.
What if it's in mint condition and then it's got the bun warmer?
A product that can never be cleaned. No one has ever perfectly cleaned a George Foreman grill. It cannot be done.
I clean ours constantly, and it's just fully disgusting. But the thing
Wait, you have today in 2023 a George Foreman grill?
I am reasonably confident that the George Foreman grill I have is older than both me and my wife. It was like my wife's grandma's, and it just somehow was in our house. I don't know how it got here.
Switch this segment to George Foreman grills.
I use it all the time. It's great. No.
What do you use it for? Are you making like stuffed burgers like George Foreman?
Yeah, constantly. No, it's like I'm just saying if you have leftover chicken breast and some cold bread and you want to throw it on the Foreman grill for 90 seconds and eat lunch.
It's a panini. It's your panini
magic.
press.
Yeah. No, but back to the iMac. Listen, David's recipe blog is another story for another day.
That's going to be a success. Talk about getting the views. Put some cold chicken on a 30-year-old George Foreman grill.
I want to hear the story about how your wife's grandmother grew up
Will we live
building
or die today
with
at
the George
lunchtime
Foreman
with
grill.
David Pierce?
Do you know those things that just end up in your house? You're like, I didn't buy this. I never asked for this. I just have this now. That's the Foreman grill in my house. Like, it's George Foreman himself might have brought it to our house for all I know. Like, I sincerely don't know. But the thing about the iMac that most blew my mind, Dan, was like reading Jason's piece, the full like YOLO energy of this thing from Apple in 1998, where they're just like, oh, you want a floppy disk? Screw you, USB. You want a thing that looks like a computer? No, here's this weird Pixar looking piece of nonsense. There's just like, you just get this vibe from Apple that I kind of love, where they're like, look, we know if this doesn't work, we're screwed, and realistically we're probably screwed anyway. So like, here's the weirdest thing we can think of. Do you like it?
It's got a handle.
And people did. Yeah, exactly.
Well, so I was talking about this on Instagram Threads with a few people. People keep saying they want a desktop version of Instagram Threads. This is like the thing everyone says. We say it. It's Mark Zuckerberg is replying to Jay Peters saying it's coming soon because we say it a lot. That's a real thing that happened this week. What they mean is a web version, right?
Yeah.
The desktop application default that most people think about is a web app, especially for a platform like Instagram Threads. No one is out here asking for a native Windows 32. No one is out here asking for a native
I would like a
32
native app,
Instagram Threads application. Yeah, but that's like a very small.
Just
It's just like not the thing people are asking. If Instagram's response was you can run the iPhone app on your Mac using Apple Silicon, some nerds would be very happy, and most people are like, what the hell is this? I just want to run it in my browser.
Yeah.
And Apple in particular with the iMac, that was the moment that began.
Yep.
Right. Until that computer, desktop applications on computers were generally not connected. Mm-hmm. Right. The web was just starting. That was the Wintel monopoly, the height of the Wintel monopoly. Even like AMD in that moment was not like a serious competitor to Intel. So you had Win32 and you had Intel, and that was the application environment for 99% of everything. And the Mac was this like rump platform that Microsoft sort of openly talked about supporting so they wouldn't be a monopoly. Like they're like, as long as we have this competitor, we won't get sued by the Justice Department. Little did they know. This is a lot. Like in that moment, Apple basically said there's this idea of a network computer. And the original vision was like a $500 terminal with just a web browser, which we have finally gotten to with like Chrome boxes. But that was like sort of the genesis. And it got bigger because they couldn't really build it then. But no floppy drive was so you could send files. Radical idea at the time. There were like entire issues of Macworld that were like, how will we survive?
I think that was like Walt Mossberg's one criticism of it in his review.
Yeah.
Was like, no floppy disk. This is bullshit. But in the world way.
Importantly, the reason that it was a viable product to sell to people was that they were like, you can just plug it into the internet and use the web, which is the thing you want. You don't want Microsoft Word running on an Intel processor on Windows. You want a web browser that can bring you all this cool web stuff. And if not for the web and web standards, this computer is a gargantuan flop, right? It looked cool as hell. It dropped all the bullshit. You only really had to plug in 2 wires. Like that was a very famous commercial. Like you plug it in and there's no step 3, Jeff Goldblum, like that whole thing. It signed you up for internet access through an ISP. And then you can just like run a web browser on it. And and now we're just 25 years later, people are like, I want a desktop version of Instagram Threads, and they mean a web app. And there's just a straight line from that idea to this idea that I think we often underestimate. Like that's the revolution. The phone is very important. It just came it's just the last piece of that puzzle. The first one was, we can sell a computer that basically runs a web browser.
However,
like, if we do a good job of that, we can become the Apple that we are today.
Which is why like the Johnny Ive thing became so important, right? Like they timed giving a new crap about design perfectly. Because like I think Jason has this line in his piece that's like, on the internet, nobody knew you were using a Mac. And I love that because it's true. And it's like, you could just buy the computer that looked cool and was blue and had a handle. And all the stuff you wanted to do on the internet, you could still do. And it was like the Apple being a hardware company worked for it in a sort of unique way in that moment because it had no ecosystem play. It was like, all we can do is build a cool thing and hope that people want to use it because we don't have any other moves.
Yeah. The PowerPC G3. Have you heard of it? It's we're gonna walk away from this as fast as we can. And all that stuff is really hard for them. Like I think we underestimate how Apple's very good at processor transitions. Now we take it for granted. They're like, we're gonna run the Macs on Apple Silicon. And we're like, oh, you're good at this. In that moment, right? They were stuck on the G3 architecture. They were stuck with the iMac launched with OS 9, which if you, wow. I am old. That was not a good
sweet.
operating
What are you
system.
talking about?
This is an operating system.
Your text.
You could. This is an operating system that famously, until the very end, you could bring the entire OS to a dead halt by holding down the mouse button. And that was like by design. Like it was not a native multitasking, multi-threaded OS. I think until the very, very end of OS 9, you could be like, you know what? I just need to, everyone stop for a second. You just like hold down the mouse button and be like, we're waiting. Everyone chill the fuck out. Like we're waiting. Like, and they had to do OS 10, like all this stuff they had to do, but they needed to sell enough iMacs to get there. That kind of brings us to where the iMac is today, right? That's a history. Mm-hmm. I will say that you should look at the visual history that we did, and we should all stop and take a moment and recognize the iMac G4 as the pinnacle of computer design.
Wait, can I tell you a story?
Downhill ever since.
Can I tell you a story about the iMac G4?
Yeah.
So I bought, let's see, this was probably 2011. I bought an iMac G4 because it was the only Mac I could afford, which you will realize if you do math that it's a 9-year-old computer that is long since out of date and no one is caring about it. This is the only Mac I could afford. I bought it from a stranger on Craigslist. We met in I believe it was Union Square, and he literally like went through an existential crisis giving me this computer that I think I paid like $150 for.
Yeah.
Because he wanted it so bad and regretted so immediately selling this thing to me that literally like as he was handing it to me was like, but it's so, I don't need it, but like, I love it. And it's just, and I was like, yeah, like that's why I want it too. Like I want this old ass computer because it's so cool looking. The G4 was my first ever Mac, period. And it was so old and so useless at that point, and I loved it to pieces because it was so cool looking. It was just genuinely think it. I agree with you. I think it's the best looking.
It's a shame they only did it for one generation. Like it lasted for like a year and a half or so, and then boom, right on to what ultimately looked like a big iPod.
Yeah. Wait, I have a story to tell about that, but Kranz, I want to hear your bad.
Like, did you guys have to use that G4 iMac?
Yeah, David used it. I mean, he still used it. It's right next to his George Foreman grill.
But did you use it at the time? Because it was not great. Like, I don't know. The G3 was just, there was something much more charming about the G3 iMacs, like the big CRTs.
Well, I think the G3 was almost like cartoon-like. And then the G4 was a much more serious, this is the future.
Wait, no, hold on. We gotta get this timeline right. There's the original iMac, which is Bondi Blue.
Yep.
Then there was the rainbow ones. Mm-hmm.
And that came out like 6 months later.
Colors. I think those are the ones you might be talking about, Alex.
That's the G.
That's what I had. Yeah.
That's the iMac G3. Then there was a bizarre interregnum where Steve Jobs got on a stage and said, "We have some exciting new iMacs to offer you today," and everyone thought he was going to do a flat panel iMac, and he was like, "These motherfuckers are called Dalmatian and Flower Power."
Yeah.
What?
Literally, people were like,
they were so ugly.
"What are you talking about?" And that was like the last gasp of that shape. Go look at a blue Dalmatian iMac.
It's beautiful.
They cannot be found. Like Apple went across the world and country, collected them all, and was like, "You memory hole this." Steve Jobs famously walked off of stage when he announced those things after sensing the vibe in the room and said it should have been fucking ready. And what he meant was the flat panel iMac should have been ready.
Yeah.
This is a real thing. You can go look this up.
I just Googled this and I'm looking at these for the first time in my life. And first of all, everyone should do this and look at these because these are incredible. And what these look like to me is if somebody took a normal iMac and then like, those really awful like $1.99 skins you can buy on your phone.
Yeah.
That like from Amazon that you just like apply to the back of your phone and they don't quite stick right. And it's very clear that somebody just like took a picture of a wallpaper and then put it on this. That's what this looks like to me.
They are nuts. We had them in my computer lab,
an actual product
in college, and they are nuts. Like they're just.
So I was gonna say, I was in college around the same time, and I had to do IT, so I had to like work on everybody's computers. That's what my piece on the iMac is about.
Is this why we vibe? Because we were both like college IT people.
Yeah, we were both like.
I don't think we've ever really talked about this, but I've known it in my heart for quite some time.
Yeah, it's why. That's why we always judge David. He was in high school being like, "Oh boy,
Jesus, where did that just come from?"
Damn, man, that's just like David took a shot.
I was out just like partying and getting laid. Sorry, guys.
We had computers to talk about. We were having a great time over there. But you could tell, like...
Dan's suspiciously quiet on what he was doing.
I was an IT person in high school.
There we go.
We were
That's
the cool
right.
kids.
I had a high school job as a PC tech for a local
I
hospital.
think it's very obvious that this group of people was nerds in high school. Alex, continue your story.
And David. But no, you could tell, like, basically how much people's parents spent on them for school based on which generation of iMac they had. So if somebody comes in with a Bondi Blue, you're like, ooh, you got the hand-me-down, huh? They had like the Blueberry or something. You're like, okay. And then they had that Dalmatian one. You were like, wow, you're loaded.
This is a straight class system based on iMac colors that you have imposed on your customers in the college IT shop. There was like a middle period that we haven't talked about, like the iMac DV where the shells got clear. It was all cool. But I'm saying that was the last version. And then this is the thing I wanted to say about the G4. This is when it was a Steve Jobs moment unlike any other, where they released the iMac G4 and he was like, everyone else solves this flat panel computer problem by putting the computer behind the display. And he did the thing. He like put up a bad version of that drawing. And he was like, this isn't the right idea. We made it a sunflower. And the thing was on the cover of Time magazine. I think it was a Stephen Levy piece on the cover of Time magazine. And Jobs and Johnny Ive told an entire story in Time magazine about how they were trying to solve this problem of where the computer should go with the flat panel. And they were walking and they saw a sunflower and the birds sang, and Johnny looked at Steve and Steve looked at Johnny, and they were like, we did it. And then 18 months later, like, we put the computer behind the display because that's what
passionately in front of sunflower.
But it's like they sold that thing so completely until they were ready to do it the right way, and then they dropped it like a stone.
Yeah.
They're like, we actually solved the problem, and here's the thing you've always wanted. And it has been that thing ever since. And just that thing where they so completely bought into the solution they had at the minute until they were ready to do it the way they wanted. And then they never talked about it again. It was dead to the world. Like, no company can do that now. Like, even Apple basically cannot do that anymore, right? There are too many installed devices. There are too many old things to support. Like, all this stuff to be like, for 18 months, we talked about sunflowers. Never remember that again. Erase the sunflowers from your brain. Now it's a white piece of a white rectangle, and that's the future of the iMac. To me, it's like in the history of the iMac, that moment is more about Apple's culture than anything else. And it's sort of like unremarked upon because they successfully memory hold the iMac G4. But it was that shift that I was like, oh, they are ruthless. Like, they are ruthless about getting to the right answer as fast as they can and not talking about everything they did in the past. To this day, like, you think about a car company, Ford's like, we made another Bronco. Like, it looks like the old Bronco. Like, here's yet another Mustang. Like, most companies are very excited to trade on their past in a way that Apple, like, maybe a little bit more recently. But you will note, Apple said nothing about 25 years of the iMac.
Yeah.
They had two opportunities to say it this year. The announcement in May, and then the in-store in August, which is when we timed our package. But yeah, not a peep.
Yeah. And I think it's all of that Apple culture is pinpointed in that moment where literally this computer was on the cover of Time magazine. And then 18 months later, they're like, here's the white one you wanted. And like, that was it. Like, the end. We have this other piece here. It's really about the future of the Mac, right? Like, where does it go now? It's in a weird spot.
Yeah. So Monica wrote a really great piece on, nowadays Apple's Mac business is 75 or 80% laptops. And then the rest is like really niche computers. The Mac Studio, the Mac Mini, and then there's the iMac, which was updated in spring 2021 with the M1 chip. It's got that new design, and it's basically just been parked for like 2.5 years now. We've got M2 chips in other laptops or other Mac computers. It's not in the iMac for whatever reason. But like, the iMac has been this kind of thing that just kind of ebbs and flows for the past decade or so. Like, Apple will release an update and then ignore it for like 4 years, and then we get an iMac Pro, and then it gets ignored for 4 years, and then we get a new M1 iMac, and then it gets ignored for however many years. So Monica's takeaway was ultimately that like Apple isn't ditching the iMac or getting rid of the iMac. That's just kind of the place that the iMac sits in today's Apple is just much less prominent and less influential than it was 2 decades ago, or certainly 2.5 decades ago. So it's just like a different product. What's interesting to me is that the original iMac that we talked about and all the generations after that were basically, save for the iMac Pro, pitched as consumer products and consumer computers. And the current iMac is still kind of pitched as that consumer computer, whereas the other Mac desktops are really pitched towards professional, creative, niche use cases. But Apple doesn't really talk about the iMac all that often, outside of its like initial launch when they showed yellow iMacs in kitchens, which is a very odd place to put an iMac. So it
especially that it doesn't have a touch.
Doesn't have a touchscreen. Yeah, no, you need your touchpad, your trackpad, and keyboard in addition to your iMac in your kitchen.
Can I run a theory by you guys that I think is right, but have no actual data for, just lots of anecdotal evidence? I would bet that people keep iMacs longer than any other single Apple product. Like I would bet the average use lifespan of an iMac is the longest of any other Mac, because the screen is very good. The thing works relatively well. You're not going to notice when the battery starts to give out, which is often the first thing that goes in a lot of laptops. And the like inertia of upgrading is so big because it's just the whole thing. Yeah. If I have a desktop, if I like want to upgrade the Mac Mini I'm sitting here with, I can keep everything else I have and just slot in a new Mac Mini. Upgrading your iMac is like upgrading your whole office all at once. And also, like you said, Dan, these are consumer things that people are like, this is like the familiest computer that Apple has, right? And I think if you have like a 2011 iMac that's just like sitting in your den, the like leap to upgrade that is huge. And the reasons to upgrade that when it's like a pretty good screen and the only thing that's really wrong with it 12 years later is that it's like pretty slow. My guess would be that like the average lifespan of one of those things is just absolutely off the charts. And if I'm Apple, I'm looking at that and saying, well, I'm going to sell people a computer they're going to upgrade once every 11 years. I'd rather sell them a MacBook.
Yeah, you know, people do with their MacBook Airs, they drop them.
I also
straight like
they spill things on them.
Well, I think the battery part of this is the big, like that's a big part of this, is because those batteries go and you can't replace them on newer laptops and stuff. So it's just like your foobarred. Whereas your iMac can go forever. I think somebody on this call might be recording with like an ancient iMac.
I'm looking at it right now. It's a 2015 27-inch iMac. I will say that
and you're name another gadget you own that is 8 years old.
The cameras are coming up on that. The D7500 coming up on that. But that's like an emotional, like I should upgrade the camera. Like I take a lot of shit from this team for slotting that camera. But it's never done me wrong. Old man still got it. This computer I basically use for this. I run one web app on it. I run Riverside to do this show, and it's this setup and everything plugs into it. And it's fine. It is radically overspec. So our studio, Vox Media Studios, was upgrading their computers many years ago, and they were just going to recycle this. And I was like, I'm taking it. Because we're just like sitting on the curb, and I was like, can I just, I don't know. And they're like, don't tell anyone. Now I told everyone. So it goes. But it has the key is it has 32 gigs of RAM. And this is like the key to longevity of every computer, in my opinion, is like it has massively more RAM than it needed in its time. And that means it stays forever. Which is why I tell everybody who buys a Mac now that 8 gigs of RAM is not enough. Like that to me is more of the evidence of Apple's planned obsolescence than anything else, is 8 gigs of soldered RAM. Like, no.
No, don't do that.
And it's just weird. And I think, David, you're right. The iMac sits in a lot of places. My parents have an ancient one. They refer to it as the mainframe. It's very good. Yeah. And they go to it when they want to do anything serious, like logging into the bank. because they want a big screen and a browser that feels safe.
Because
And
you
I'm
can't
like,
use your phone. Why don't parents like
because they
bank
feel
apps?
like their phone is not serious enough for logging into the bank.
I think that
Okay.
what you're describing, Eli, and what David you described as like it's sitting in a den, that is like the original concept of the iMac. It was a shared family computer, and it's just that at this point, at this time, that doesn't exist as a product for a lot of people in functional ways in their lives. If you've got kids in school, they're not coming home and sitting at a desktop to do their homework. They're doing it on a Chromebook that links up to their school's network and goes with them to school. Or they have their own personal devices, an iPad or an iPhone or whatever smartphone. The shared concept of a family computer is like not something that really fits into the modern day life. Whereas the other desktops in Apple's lineup, the Mac Mini, the Mac Studio, etc., they have like purposes that fit into people's lives as like devices that they work on all day. But the iMac as the family thing doesn't really exist anymore.
That was like, I mean, the iMac itself was a response to everybody had family computers.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the 80s and 90s, if you had a computer, it probably wasn't in your room unless you were like just Richie Rich, right? Like you had a lot of money.
Alex is like, get that Blue
Unless you were
Dalmatian
bringing the
computer out of my
Dalmatian
face.
one.
Yeah, right. Like you didn't have that. Like everybody. So the iMac, when the iMac came out, it was like, oh, this is a computer where it's not just the parents using a beige box. Like the kids can interact with this, which is why my brother watched A Bug's Life on repeat every day, over and over and over again on the damn thing. And nowadays, computers are cheaper, they're more affordable. So and laptops have become much, much more affordable than they were at the time. Like a laptop was still insanely expensive at the time. I think all of my laptops until I got out of college were hand-me-downs because my parents were like, absolutely not. You do not get a brand new laptop you're going to drop on its face and break. And then we have to pay for it. Get out. But the prices have come down, so it's like it's much more affordable. It's much easier to go and buy a Chromebook for a kid than be like, okay, everybody's going to use this communal computer in the living room, and also like we have to have a space in our living room carved out just for the computer. And then you got one kid on the computer, another kid watching TV, and they're all yelling at each other. And now they can just all have phones.
Or the school dictates that they have a
Alex,
Chromebook, which like takes the decision out of your hands entirely. And then like that iMac that you have sitting there is like not used by them because it's not the tool that fits into the rest of their curriculum.
Alex just made a striking case to bring back the computer room.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I'm in on this. Yeah.
I want a computer room. That was the best.
We should
like you were always sitting in like a dining room chair that you should not be sitting in, hunched over it.
Everybody had that horrible Office Max furniture.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? The desk and the hutch and the whole thing.
You roll the
All
little
right,
hutch
here's what I
down.
want. Vergecast listeners, send me photos of your computer rooms.
Yes.
Not your modern gamer rooms. I mean your childhood computer rooms. Yeah. If you have such a photo, I just want to look at them. And maybe we'll run like a thing about computer rooms. Who knows? If they're good enough.
Mine's
Again,
cursed.
I do not want your weird gamer den with your LED lightings and your Wi-Fis. I want your 486 tower with a turbo button with Encarta open on a CRT.
Hell
like
yeah.
That's the
poorly
room I'm looking
exposed
for.
photo.
Yeah, you know
shot on,
exactly
like-
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Show me where you came from.
I had a
I mean
gateway with the cow logo. Those are the days.
Yeah.
Yeah, give me your origin story in a photo of your computer room. All right, we've talked about the iMac quite a bit. There is an Apple event coming up. We're assuming in September for iPhones. That's a pretty solid guess given the decade plus of iPhones coming out in September. iOS 17 betas are out. Dan, any thoughts here?
They keep moving the end call button, which seems to be driving people wild. I think, other than that, I think iOS 17 is going to be, for a lot of people, and we've kind of said this in our preview coverage already, that it's going to be a pretty small update across a lot of things. And some people are really going to appreciate little things like interactive widgets.
I was going to say my one quibble with the characterization of small update is that every app developer that exists on the internet will not shut up about how excited they are about interactive widgets. It's going to get full crazy with
And
the
maybe
interactive widgets.
it'll just be more exciting when it launches and those app developers can actually put out their work. But right now, if you've been using the
Whatever,
beta,
Dan, you're going to check off a to-do on the home screen of your
it's gonna be
iPhone and
great.
you're going to freak
It's
out.
gonna be so
gonna
great.
be
At the grocery store, checking off to-dos on my widget, like I could have been doing on Android since 2010.
coming.
But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's going to be the 17th version of iOS. It's like, what are we expecting to change here?
I'm excited because the autocorrect situation is bad. It has, now that people have pointed out so consistently to us, it has gotten worse in a way that is impossible to measure, but it's definitely worse. And I'm
vibes are
looking
off.
forward to this update. Yeah,
The
give me
vibes are
your
bad.
LLM powered autocorrect. Like, I'll take it. Anything has to be better than this. It's weird, right? If you guys noticed, it's gotten worse.
No, everybody judges me. They always know when I'm on my phone because there's always at least one horrible, confusing typo that like Apple was just like, no, I got you. I'm going to change this word. It totally makes sense. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's a terrible context.
My theory is that Apple is just trying to push us towards that humane AI pin. They're like, what if you don't use this computer? What if you just talk to your hand instead?
Just, hey guys, what's up? I have thoughts
By the
about
way-
the show we're watching.